Emotions and triggers are completely distinct phenomenon. You see, the purpose of emotions is to accurately create a relationship to the moment. And emotions are temporary phenomenon. Sort of like when you come home and your dog wags its tail, it's happy for this circumstantial change. And when you leave, it gets sad. You see, the animal's emotions always correlate to something outside of the animal. Now, what makes triggers unique is triggers are actually malformations. They're animal fight or flight reactions that are programmed backwards, where the first person experience of the child includes this idea of me. And the idea of me is something that's new, that was created when we got language. When we could identify ourselves, it actually had a phenomenal effect on our consciousness, and we might consider that self awareness. But what we learn in doing these exercises is that the self was merely meant to be the external experience from your point of view, that the dog sees reality through the eyes of dog. And your dog, your cat, your goldfish, and that praying mantis outside are present all the time, that they don't go into their head and think about things. You see, going into your head is caused by the first stage of the fight or flight being adulterated by me. You see, having an external world and an internal world was a new phenomenon that the fight or flight mechanism was not designed to include. You see, the fight or flight mechanism existed during the entirety of human evolution, and at some point, we developed so much intelligence that we had the ability not just to form this accurate universe within our mind the moment we open our eyes, but enough to create an imagination that empowered human beings to think about the future and to objectively evaluate things like the behaviors of animals to predict, so we could actually learn their psychology intuitively to the point where we could train a wolf to be a shepherd or understand a seed making a plant. And so our ability to engage reality became so profound, we wouldn't need muscles because we could outthink every single animal that only used past experiences to regulate their behavior in a robotic and predictable manner for the most part. But you see, the fight or flight reaction has been adulterated, where rather than viewing external threats, the child became the threat to the child. So let me explain how that happened. So the very first thing that happens in a fight or flight is this expansion of consciousness for the animal. It gets triggered and there's something wrong here. It could be a sound, it could be a smell, but the animal needs to be able to know where that came from. And so its consciousness has to expand, and all its sensations, hearing, eyes, its nose, have to be very sensitive so it could locate, because animals hide from each other. And so there could be a fox over there hiding from the rabbit to ambush it. And so if it hears leaves, it'll wake up suddenly from a sleep. Because the sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight, is like the alarm system. It's very sensitive. That's why all the wild animals always run away from you, whether you're hunting them or not. It's why your dog automatically barks. And when your dog barks, it becomes attached, oblivious to you. In fact, if it's fighting another dog and you try to intervene, you could be bitten, because the fight or flight is the basis of human psychopathy even, because it causes dissociation and tunnel vision. And so the first step is something is wrong here, and if my dog is aroused from a sleep or the rabbit in the den, it will wake up and immediately start scouring its environment to locate specifically the threat. 2 ears and 2 eyes create a three-dimensional model that the consciousness of the animal is moving around within as it scans the landscape. When it encounters a specific threat, it enters into official fight or flight. This is what creates the subconscious, because the neurological blockade blocks out the awareness of the animal so that the universe the animal lives within is dominated by an attachment and fixation upon the threat. And so it collapses the consciousness so that all the rabbit is aware of now is the fox and how to get away. And so the emotion of running is an experience of being small, not enough. I'm not good enough, and that's where it comes from. The proverbial avoidance is the experience of being not enough. Well, that's an emotion that comes from the fight or flight. And how often do you feel not enough even though you know you are? And how often has I'm not good enough actually devastated you, affected your performance on a test, or caused you to choke on an interview, or caused you to fumble and bumble while you avoid rejection, knowing that you should get this? How many times have you really tried to do something and then you couldn't really bring your best to the table because of fear? Well, that's because when you had your first fight or flight, you had already segregated the experience of consciousness as an awareness of the external world and then another internal experience. And so that's the difference between us and animals, is that the genesis of language did not happen, over a long period of time, and we have an evolutionary problem where the animal fight or flight reaction becomes everybody's Adam and Eve moment, and it's created all mental health disorders. And it is to be discovered that psychology doesn't know what I'm telling you right now. And that's why their therapeutic modalities don't cure anybody. But I'm going to tell you, this is the cure to the human condition. And for people that have trouble with this type of methodological approach, understanding the physiology of the sympathetic nervous system could invent medications that would produce enlightenment for people with NPD and psychopathy. Turning off the abandonment anxiety, turning off the tunnel vision would result in seemingly a limitless drug, that we could turn off the cognitive blockades and cause enlightenment in people. But here's how it works. And so when the child has any arbitrary experience around the age of 5, for what we would call normal people, what happens is it could be anything from the dad yelling at the mom, to crashing their power wheels, to anything that results in some kind of abrupt thing. A certain threshold of yelling or excitement will cause an adrenaline reaction. An involuntary fight or flight will happen for the first time. And what happens is the same something's wrong here feeling will come. This involuntary fear. But you see, what will happen then is that the child will notice changes to me. The first time they ever felt adrenaline. And then what also happens is that the separation anxiety is what causes this artificial abandonment, because you see, the child feels safe because they're home or wherever they're at and their parents are there. But the moment the fight or flight hits, is it invokes the same anxiety that would be like being abandoned. And so it creates an artificial sense of abandonment. And it causes a dissociation because the child would notice, oh my God, something is wrong with me. The heart rate goes up, the adrenaline surges through the veins and arteries for the first time. They feel butterflies. They feel a level of fear that they've never felt. But you see, instead of inspecting the circumstances, they pay attention to their own changes. And as they notice these cascading emotional changes, the fear subordinates all their safety, the love, everything disappears. And then they start to notice these changes, and it stimulates more fear, like, what's going on? What's going on? And they dissociate into full-fledged confusion, stuckness and brokenness, and paralysis. The paralysis of freezing is because the fight or flight system is supposed to be catered to the external world, where you're looking at out there and you can formulate a behavior to run away. The child can't run away inside their head, but because they enveloped me as the threat to me, everything that they observe in this moment is recorded as the cause. So the effect of something in the kitchen, dad yelling at mom, triggers this, what's wrong with me? And then when they notice the changes, what they notice as the result of the reaction is also attributed as the cause. This crosses the signals of the afferent and efferent neurological activity of the sympathetic nervous system, meaning the trigger now will trigger itself. And in a state of confusion, the child will go, I need to figure it out and be perfect. giving birth to ego, the need to analyze in a state of dissociation.